Today's guest is Allan Mitchell. You know him as Lowetide. He's on TSN 1260 and also is a sports writer for The Athletic. I really wanted and was looking forward to having Lowetide on the show, mostly because he is so engaged with the fans. If you go on his Twitter feed, he's got tons of followers, but he also follows about 13,000 people on his own. And, you know, so many people engage with him on a daily basis. The interview that I did with him was no different. He was very engaging, just a really good guy offline and during the interview. Really happy I had the chance to interview Allan, and, he graciously suggested we do it again in a little bit. And I'm really looking forward to that. So enjoy. Love your feedback. Make sure you subscribe here, YouTube, Twitter. Really could use your help on the YouTube followers. You can get the link just by searching Oilers Live on YouTube. Anyway, enjoy the show. Have fun.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and Guess. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.
I've got as my guest today, Allan Mitchell, most of you know as Lowetide, who is a writer for The Athletic and also a radio personality in our great home, Edmonton. Welcome to the show, Allan.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoy your show. I enjoy what you do, and I know that you've done a lot for charity. So you are a good man, and I'm glad to be on.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and it's always good. Since I've started the podcast, I've had a couple of folks around the team that either write about the Oilers, or I had the Jack Michaels on at one point, and most recently I had Amy Jones, Caleb Jones' mother, on, which was a great interview. But one of the folks that, of course, as most Oilers fans know, is yourself, and so I'm excited to have you here, and thanks for joining me.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I get to talk about myself and the Oilers, if I understand. So if you ever want to talk to me, just tell me that, and I'm there. So
yeah, good. So I kind of set you up for that, offline, which is I wanted to know a little bit about where Lowetide comes from. Is your name's Allan, as a lot of people know, but people I think know you better as Lowetide. How long have you been at this? My understanding is you were a blogger initially. Is that right?
Yeah, what happened was the first contact I had with anything online to do with the Oilers was HF Boards, and at that time, this would have been the late '90s. And for the first time in really my adult life, I was staying home Monday through Sunday night because we had two little kids. And so, we'd go to the park and whatever, and I'd come home and they'd be in bed by 8 o'clock, and I'd watch X-Files or whatever. And then I went online, and I thought, well, I'll look up Oilers. And I found HF Boards, and I ended up becoming a moderator there. And during the time that I was a moderator, I became familiar with and talked to guys like Tyler Dello, Tim Murray, who was Vic Ferrari, who now works for the Washington Capitals, and a lot of really interesting people who were into analytics. And around 2004 or so, the entire analytics community from HF Boards and Oil Fans, which I believe still goes as well, they jumped onto the blogs. And I was not aware they'd done that. I really wasn't. I was moderating at HF Boards and completely happy to do so. And what happened was my daughter asked me one day. She said, "Can I have a blog?" And she was like, I'm going to say she was like 6. And I said, no, but I really didn't know what a blog was. So I checked it out at Blogger, and I found out that it was free, and so then I got interested. Once I knew it was free, it cost me nothing. I was all over it, and I migrated really over maybe a 1 or 2 year period from having a blog and moderating HF boards to just blogging and then inviting people onto my blog to talk, and sort of it just morphed naturally. It wasn't any brilliance on my part. I like to write, so I expressed myself that way. The name Lowetide came about from HF boards. I had actually used my original name, like my actual name, and somebody said, you can't do that. You have to come up with a nick. That's what they called it back then, was a nick or nickname.
Yeah.
And my first nick was Whore Coffin Die. But my wife said I couldn't call the blog Whore Coffin Die because it was rude, and maybe my kids would read it, and that would be wrong. So I used the Ron Lowe, the old goaltender for the Oilers. His nickname is Lowetide. So I took his nickname. He's L-O-W, and I added an E for Kevin Lowe, who I have a great deal of respect for, and it became Lowetide, L-O-W-E-T-I-D-E, and that's where the nick on HF boards and the blog name came from.
So curious then, that leads to the next question. Is Ron Lowe aware of the origin?
I have been told he is aware and that he is displeased, but I don't know that for sure. And if he's listening, I'm so sorry. It was not meant in any way to take away what is a very cool nickname, and it certainly was his. And it was meant as a homage to Kevin Lowe, who I'm sure he is quite fond of. So I hope he takes it in that spirit, as opposed to some knob on the internet stealing his nickname.
So now you're this guy. You're starting this blog, and all of a sudden people are tuning in and they're reading what you have to say. At what point did you think, hey, maybe this is something of a career that I could make out of this?
In all honesty, I ran the blog from say 2004 to really 2010, and it built up a wider audience than I thought it did. I didn't measure it in any way. I just knew that I'd get 600 comments, and I think I got 950. I think I got over 1,000 a few times later on. But I was not really. It's not really in my nature to be measuring things in that way. So I went along my life. It was a leisure activity. I enjoyed it. I got to write about things that I liked, and I learned a lot from the people who were commenting on the blog. In about 2010, I'm going to say, and I might be wrong about the exact date, I sold a radio show to Oilers Nation, and it was called Nation Radio on Saturdays, and I sold it and I set it up, and it takes a lot of work to set up a show like that. And right at the last minute, and I'll tell something a little out of school here, Jason Gregor was going to be the host of the show. He was going to work Monday through Saturday, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He met a girl, ended up being his wife, and so he said, "Look, guys, I'm sorry. I know we're well into this, but I'm not going to be able to do the show." And I'd already sold it, and in radio, once you've sold it, you will do anything to make it happen, right? Like It's just one of those things where you've spent so much time getting the promos and the setting it up and putting the idea together that it's like a baby to you. So my boss at the time, Ross, he said, he works in Calgary radio now. He said, well, you do it. I said, I'm an old top 40 DJ. If you want me to introduce Prince and Madonna records, I can do it. But what the hell do I know about hosting a sports radio talk show once a week? And they said, well, that's the only option. So I did it, and I what I found was, and it took me maybe a year or so to get to the part where I enjoyed it. I just found that I enjoyed the hell out of it, and it's I think in life now, young people. Almost everybody I work with is younger than me. They enjoy old people falling ass over tea kettle into luck, and that's sort of what happened with me. It wasn't any kind of master plan. If I'd known what I was doing, I'd probably be farther along by now. But it was just me stumbling, bumbling, tumbling into one opportunity after another, and it in all honesty, I still can't believe, like from say 2004 to 2019 is 15 years. And at no time did I ever say to myself, all right, I better put together a plan. It's just happened. It's morphed naturally, put it that way.
Now, are you an Edmonton native?
No, I'm from BC, and I grew up. I lived in BC until I was 10 or 11, and then I ended up moving to Saskatchewan, and we moved to Edmonton in 77, I believe. And then I've mostly lived in Edmonton since 77, but I did go away for a while and work in smaller radio stations in Red Deer and in Regina as well. But most of the time, since about 77, I've lived in Edmonton. Okay,
and I would assume then that you've been an Oilers fan since
I was an Oilers fan in 72. I remember when... Oh, yeah. No, I remember very well. I was living in Saskatchewan, and Bill Hunter, we got the Star Phoenix, and Bill Hunter had a photo of himself on the Yellowhead with this big sign, this billboard behind him, Big League Hockey, WHA, coming to Edmonton. And I was immediately engaged, because you got to remember that the Canucks had come to the West in Vancouver in 1970. This was 72. But before that, as a child, all of the Oakland Seals and the LA Kings, they were distance away that I couldn't imagine. The West getting, pro hockey, NHL or WHA, is still a relatively new thing. So I was engaged right away, especially when they signed Al Hamilton. That's when it became really, to me, something special, because I knew who Al Hamilton was. I had his hockey card, and to me that meant it was really, really big league.
Yeah, and so I think I was just at that point in the sort of their inception in the NHL where I could sort of watch and understand hockey, but it was certainly, I mean, those years prior seem quite magical. One of the things I stumbled across that I didn't actually know until the last couple of years is that Jacques Plante spent time with the Oilers. And when I bring that up to people, I'm surprised at how few people actually know that. And it's crazy.
yeah. Well, it is, and Plante was such a legend when he was here. Like he could pull a lot of fans into a building, because again, people had watched him for many years, over 20, I'm sure, as a Montreal Canadian and a New York Ranger, Toronto Maple Leaf. So he was well known, and he came here and he was outstanding. Now, they weren't great teams, but he was a big name that could pull people in. Normie Ullman was another Hall of Fame player who came after his NHL career, came to Edmonton and had a little bit of time here. But Plante was huge. He was a monster. And there's a great photo that's online. I still think the Oilers should use that jersey. It's an unusual color, a lot of orange on the piping, and it's really nice. And there's a photograph of Plante from like 1975 in that jersey. And whenever people see it now, they go, "Oh my God, why can't we get that as like the new third jersey?" And I don't blame them. It's awesome.
Excellent. I'm going to look that up and maybe post that after I publish the show. So now you've been doing this for roughly about 14 years, at least Oilers focused. There had to be something at some point that you just said to yourself, like, I can't believe I'm going to interview who would it have been? Like, what would have been the highlight interview that you've done since you've been part of this, Oilers media?
I'll give you three, and the reason I give you three is because they immediately pop to mind when you ask the question. One was Grant Fuhr, who I always thought was a brilliant goaltender, and I was a big fan of Fuhr. And when I met him, he has had I don't know if you know his backstory and all of that, but he's had a sometimes difficult, sometimes blessed life, and I met a very humble guy, who had a great awareness of himself, but I'm in awe of him, and he is absolutely not that guy. And he's very grounded, very smart, will talk about anything. And I was just so impressed with him as an individual. And the interview came off like that. He just was, any question I asked him, he gave me a very sincere answer. And it was a great thrill to interview him, but I also was just thrilled with the interview itself because he was so open about everything. The second one I'm going to mention is Fernando Pisani. I got to interview him a few years ago, and we talked about '06, and we talked about what that team meant, and about how, even though they didn't win a Stanley Cup, they have a very special place in this city. And he was I think about to go to the U of A to coach, so we talked about that as well. But it was refreshing because, hockey players remember so much about distant events, and this would have been several years after '06, and he remembered everything. So I got to relive the moments that he had in that series, and that was a thrill. And the third one that I'll mention is, and it wasn't a matter of being in awe, it was just a matter of me being so impressed with how together he is as such a young man. But when I was interviewing Connor McDavid, I was impressed by his thoughtfulness, but then I listened back to the interview, and his answers, even though he's kind of a typical hockey player, almost like Bobby Orr, where it's an aw shucks kind of a way, or not necessarily a formal kind of an interview type, his words actually are very well thought out. He's a very thoughtful guy. So after I'd done the interview, I know probably you're young, you probably have a way where you take the interview and you play it to something, and then it gives you all the words out. I have to go and write out the interview as I hear it myself, the old-fashioned way. So it took me about an hour to do. And at the end of the hour, I just realized that the questions that I'd asked him, he'd given me really good answers and not canned ones. The nature of hockey today is that you get the answer that you expect from the question that you give. But he didn't do that. He gave me really good answers that were very usable. I've used them in several different articles over the years. So that first interview with Connor McDavid, for me, was a revelation because I didn't know him at all, but he's a very thoughtful young man.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've never talked to Pisani or McDavid for that matter, but I've met Grant Fuhr a couple of times and met him in Calgary at the premiere of Making Coco, and actually walked with him and his wife to their hotel after. Not on purpose. We just happened to be leaving at the same time, and I couldn't have. You can't have met a more personable, more down to earth guy than Grant, and he just seems so humble and yeah, what a wonderful guy, and I'm sure Pisani. I just played hockey a couple weekends ago with Ethan Moreau.
Oh, cool!
And yeah,
did he body check you?
No, he was on my team. He was a bit of a riot, but some things, talking out of school that I would definitely not talk about. But he's, he was a fun guy and had some neat insights, and you got to save
that for the tell-all podcast at the end of the run, right?
That's right. Yeah. If I ever get there, I'll definitely do a tell-all. So, one of the things that I remember last year, you did the rant, and that was it was played all over the place, and I think you would know which rant I'm referring to. The Oilers had a lackluster effort the day before, and I think you went right into it as your show aired, and of course, it went wild. It went somewhat viral among the Oilers community. Are there moments like that? Any that come to mind? And maybe that's a big one for you. I don't know where it fits, but any sort of moments like that you remember in your run so far?
I remember it seemed like it was the third 5-0 score in like 3 weeks over Christmas time. They'd gone into Christmas like 11-2, and they lost to maybe LA and then Ottawa, and then a Buffalo game was the 5-0 game that I did the rant on. And what I was noticing was that, and look, it's a long season, and there are times where I am told, where the energy level just isn't there. But this was a home stand over Christmas time, and they were just missing everything. They were missing everything. They weren't strong on the penalty kill. The power play was wrong. 5-on-5, they were horrible. Defensive coverage was down. They weren't sharp. And I Todd McLellan is a really good coach, and they had their issues. They were not the strong team that you hoped they'd be by this time. But by the same token, I've seen far less talented teams work a hell of a lot harder. And so and I'd seen it like 3 times over the 3-week period. And, I'm not one of those people who I really respect these athletes because they're brilliant athletes, but something was wrong, and I don't know what it was. There were all kinds of rumors about what was going on at the time, and I don't get into rumors, but really the on-ice product had gone completely to hell. So I remember one time, around that time, somebody said, "What did you write down?" And all I wrote down was frustration, because that's all that was what I had felt. I get defensive about Oiler fans because I know a lot of them, and they drive. Some season ticket holders, they live in Grand Prairie, or they live in Red Deer, or they live wherever. So it's a minus 35-degree night, and they're driving from Red Deer to watch the game, and then they got to drive home afterwards. It's a big investment, not just in money, but in time and in effort and in fuel, right? And so I was frustrated by that. So it had built up 3 times. It was the 3rd time that it had happened over that period, and I always feel bad because it's not like they're not trying. It just was looking so bad, but. It ended up probably being one of the things that the show is most known for. So at that level, I guess it did have its benefits.
Yeah. It was, and to your credit, it was great. It was, filled with emotion. I mean, I think we all at the time, and I'm one of those fans that lives a good distance and pays, for season tickets. And so, it was, I was at that Buffalo game, in fact, and very disappointed. And I think, something like that isn't successful or listened to if it's not agreed with, right? If everybody thought, Lowetide's just going on a rant, then I think, it would have just been that. Nobody would have said anything. But I think we were all feeling the same way at that time. As you do this, as you carry on and go through this, I'm curious. I'm always curious because and I know, and I don't know if you listen to some of the the other media on the air, like the Bob Stoffers of this world. If you get a chance to listen, I know you're typically working during those times, but you see Bob quite often goes off about Twitter and that, and I think you have on occasion. What's it like? From your perspective, how do you block all of that out? Because it's a place. I get it, and I'm not a big name in terms of media and podcasting, but I get the odd negative commentary for little or no reason. I would think that there's tons out there and tons of people that are writing stuff and blogging. Is that something you've just learned to grow with, or does it still really get to you at times?
Oh, I don't remember the last thing that upset me. It would have been a long time ago. I'm going to say 95% of the interactions I have with Oiler fans are not just good, but they're fun. They just are. And sometimes I'll say something and somebody will respond and say, "Hey, I've got an idea for you." And I love those most of all. They're great. But there are some times where people, I think they misunderstand. I think that the one advantage that I have is that I was, in before almost everybody, right? So when I started, it was me and about 5 other guys and girls. And so it wasn't like, there was there was no audience. In fact, like my first early blogs, I mean, 3 people would have responded. So I was writing for myself basically, and because we had kids at home, and ordinarily I'd be at the bar or something, but you can't when you have your kids at home. So you go online and you do whatever, and so I was just writing for myself, and we didn't know. I don't think Tyler Dello thought he was going to be working for the New Jersey Devils, and I don't think that Vic Ferrari thought that he'd be winning a Stanley Cup for the Washington Capitals or wherever everybody ended up. Lots of people have ended up in media. Murat Atesh, who was showerhead in the olden days, he works for the Athletic in Winnipeg, and lots of people have caught on with media jobs and whatever. So it's been far more lucrative than anybody thought. But it's also, I think, it's built. The industry was already there. The industry of media was already there. But what it's done is it's built. And because of technology, now it's this massive thing. So most of the reaction I get is really positive. Some of it is very complimentary, and I'd say very little of it is even overly negative. Most of it is, some of it's critical. Like you really have you have a great deal of short-sightedness on this particular player, but I mean that's okay because it's criticism. It's not targeted at me. But I don't, honestly, I cannot remember the last time something really got to me, although it used to. I'll be honest, it used to, because I just wasn't used to. I'm an older guy, so you young people are far more aggressive than I ever was. Part of that's probably the internet. But I think as a group, there's the younger generation is less likely to stand on ceremony or accept, the niceties as opposed to just finding out the truth or telling people what they think. And that's good, but it's different than what I experienced.
Yeah, I could see that. So one thing I'll tell you is that, and you kind of alluded to this, is that it's grown into a bigger thing than you ever thought possible. Is Ethan Moreau? One of the things I'll take from, and I was next to him in the dressing room, so I had some good chats with him. We played 3 games that day. And one of the things he said was during his time in Edmonton, that was when he felt like Edmonton went from being a small market team to a big market team. And his opinion is that people still don't realize that.
I think it's a big market team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you when it happened, in my opinion, and I don't mean to interrupt you because you probably have a question, but I think it's when 2 things happened. The salary cap changed everything, and the Oilers at some point in time they got ownership that was flush. But I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I think that's those are great points, and I think that's probably exactly when it happened, and that's about in line with what Moreau was saying. I was going to say, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've got a couple more minutes here. What I would like to leave with is at least some Oilers talk to leave with those that are listening for Oilers talk. Quickly, I guess, what do you have an early favorite for the GM, and do you have kind of a timeline that you think in mind?
Well, I'll say this, that at the beginning of this process, I was like, man, they got to be super aggressive here because they got to get a right guy and they got to make sure they get the right guy, and there's only a few right guys out there. But the more I look at it, I looked at Ron Hextall. I've sort of looked at Ken Holland. John Willis has been looking at some Daniel Nugent-Bowman as well. Man, there's some really good candidates out there, and if they're interviewing them, then I don't. Based on the names that I've seen and heard mentioned, I think they're shopping in a really nice aisle of general managers. And somebody sent my cohort Tyler at work today a picture of Ken Holland at the Edmonton airport. No idea whether he was here with Detroit or whatever, but we Tyler threw it out and if they're talking to Ken Holland, I think Ken Holland and Keith Gretzky could work. I I don't have a preference. The only thing that I will say is that the Oilers have to shift their thinking away from, right now they're coming out of a heavy hockey era, and now they're going to go speed. I would prefer that they have a balance. Heavy hockey is working. Right, like if you saw the Columbus series against Tampa Bay, those guys were hammering people. So, but they can also skate. So, I think you can have heavy hockey. You just can't have heavy, slow hockey, and you have to have more skill than the Oilers have had. So, that little shift in thinking, I think, will be very important. And as far as favorites for GM is concerned, I guess I'd like to see McCrimmon because I think he's done really well. But I'll tell you that I'm far more encouraged after having looked at a lot of these guys and read about them. There appear to be a lot of good candidates, which makes sense because it's a job with like 32 positions. So you'd really think that there'd be a lot of qualified people not working.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, and my McCrimmon seems to me to be the one that I would be my choice or my thought, and I don't think we're going to see any, any decisions on that until at least Vegas is out of the playoffs. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so you said you don't live in Edmonton?
No, I am, and I tell people this. I'm in Calgary.
Okay,
like a lot of Oilers fans.
So you drive up for all the games?
I don't. So I don't go to everyone, right. But I go to as many as I can. And you can imagine, like, I don't get. This is a hobby for me, the podcasting. And it's an expensive hobby at times. So I'm a big fan. I'm an Oilers fan, and this was my first year being a season ticket holder. I generally go to a half dozen games a year. Drive up and the job that I say pays my podcasting bills takes me to Edmonton on occasion. And so I'll stay at the Fairmont quite often and get a chance to see some players and I've even been able to. I was in Vancouver and watched the Oilers there and stayed at the same hotel with the Oilers then and ran into DeBrusk and Jack and all those guys. I'm a big fan. I do pay. I haven't, and I haven't said this on the pod yet, but I guess this will be the first time. I haven't decided if I'm going to renew. Right?
Yeah, it's tough now. It really is. And I've talked to a lot of people, and I mean, I've gone to Oilers games since the mid '70s, and like I think the organization, I do believe they realize, like, this is like, if I added up the amount of time I spent devoted to this team, I wouldn't do it. Like, it's embarrassing. And so, for a grown man to be spending this much time over, a hockey club. But it's sort of, my generation and certainly your generation, have been able to have more leisure time than my dad's generation. So what do you fill it up with? Well, I have a wife and kids, and I spend time with them. But, my dad used to work 6 days a week and long hours, and I don't have to do that. So in northern Alberta, we spend them a lot with the Oilers. And I don't think they've ever necessarily taken that for granted, but I do think that there has reached a point now where even the best fans in the world, and I think the Oilers are the best fans in the world, have just, they've made the playoffs, really only once in over a dozen years. And, the fans, the owner, the people in management, the players, everybody deserves better. So, and I think we keep looking for like this perfect, well, what's the problem? Fix that problem. But I think that a lot of what happens is often overreaction. Where, I went back and I looked at Peter Chiarelli's interview, his first interview, where he was talking about heavy hockey. He said heavy hockey or heavy on sticks or heavy, maybe 30 times in the first interview. And so really he was signaling an overreaction. And the overreaction was this: well, the reason that we can't get to the playoffs is because we've got too many soft skilled guys. So he changed that. Now there's not enough soft skilled guys, and there's too many heavy guys, and so we're going to go to the speedy guys now. And I think that if you look at just look at Columbus and how they got through Tampa Bay, where they've got small guys, but they've got speedy guys, and then they've got big guys who can hurt you, but they can also skate, and they're strong on defense, and they've got a great goaltender. So this isn't this isn't as hard to figure out, I don't think, as maybe the Oilers have made it look like, because they've changed managers and changed coaches so many times. And that's why, even though Bob Nicholson has very a lot of people who are mad already about his choice, I don't blame him for doing his due diligence. And I don't know how much control the new GM is going to have. But I do think that if he can get a balanced roster with enough players in each of three categories, that's young phenom players, then mid-level, say 22 to 26, who are really in their prime, and then enough 27 to 32-year-olds to give some veteran leadership and some mentorship to the kids coming in. The Oilers haven't had that in a long time. They're often a team with 19 to 22-year-olds and then guys who are 30-plus. And there's nobody in the middle where everybody plays the heart of their career and the peak of their career. Now, they're almost there with Nugent Hopkins and Larson, and maybe those two guys will be the first players to run into their 30s from the beginning of their careers. I think the first since Ryan Smith. I might be wrong. It might be Sean Horkoff. Mm-hmm. But it has been several forevers for the Oilers of just simply trading their own players by the time they turn 27. And sometimes it's 26. And with Hall, I think it was 25. And what happens is you're in the forever build. And Connor McDavid is asked to do too much because he's asked to do everything. Same as Leon Draisaitl. The players who they signed as free agents, for the most part, aren't really, helping as much as they should be. So because of that, Leon and McDavid and soon Nurse and certainly Klefbom all have to help more. They need to have that middle. We know the 30-year-old guys are going to be overpaid. We know that the young guys are going to be underpaid because they're just on their entry-level deals. But that middle group is where the Oilers simply just trade them off. And they've done it for years, and they've gotten themselves into a spiral situation. And I do fear that Larson and Nugent Hopkins are a little bit vulnerable. We'll know this summer, if the new GM comes in and trades those guys, that they're still going to be repeating the same problems. Yeah,
and those are there's nothing to argue there. I mean, that's it seems somewhat obvious to those of us on the outside looking in, but just over the last 13 years has seemed like a distant thought for those running the team. I will tell you. I'll leave with this because we're talking about whether or not I'll renew. There's a couple reasons why I may not renew, and if I do, one is the product, the on ice product, right? Which you alluded to, and the reasons why we've not been successful. But obviously, if that was enough, it's kind of like. Lung cancer is not enough for people to quit smoking, right? A bad hockey team has not been enough for me to quit watching the Oilers. And what, I'll probably continue watching. There's no doubt about that. But, I see now, we're talking about big market teams, and you look at, places like Las Vegas, and they've done more. You're spending $150, $200 a ticket, which is way more than you spend to go, watch a show. I want to be entertained, and if the on-ice product's not going to be the most entertaining thing there, I think the off-ice entertainment needs to be there. I think we've got this beautiful building, we've got a marching band, and we've got a couple things. I don't leave there feeling like wow. That initial time I went to Rogers Place, I felt wow. But then, it sort of dies down a little bit. Maybe it's because the game hasn't been as exciting as it needs to be, but I think they need to up the every time I walk into that building, the opening, part of the game, I think should be outstanding. I think I should want to be there for that every game. And that clock or whatever they do, and my respect to the graphic artists and everybody around the media that do that, it's just not enough for me. And so that's one of the things. The other thing that the Oilers need to fix, and I'm not sure how, but if you got a guy like me, and you talked about, other fans coming from Grand Prairie and here and there and everywhere, when you buy season tickets, your expectation is that, especially if you live out of town, that you're not going to be able to make every game. And that at the very least, you should be able to get your dollar value back, that somebody's going to want to spend that dollar. I would tell you that I was getting back about 50 cents on the dollar on times when I could sell the tickets.
Yeah.
And the Oilers were, they had tickets left every game. They were selling less than I could sell them for. And they're, a big organization. And to me, right, like, I'm not asking to make money off of my tickets. I just want to know that if I can't go, that I'll at least get my money back. And that wasn't happening.
That's completely reasonable. And the new building had a lot of appeal, so there's that. And then Connor McDavid, honestly, if he was skating on an outdoor rink at midnight, I'd go watch.
Yeah.
And I'd pay for it because I think he's that much fun to watch. But you do get worn down by the losing. And I think, I agree. I watched the Vegas opening. I'm like, oh my God. I would send my guy down there and just say, take notes, bring them back, and we're going to steal everything. We're just going to, name it something different or whatever, right? Because whatever Vegas does, their people it's like they're hopped up on life, right? And maybe maybe it would be fake here. Maybe Edmonton isn't that market. But by the same token, I think you can make things, you can elevate it, right? Like to the experience. And I do think they can do that. And then the other thing is, if you, like the year they won, in 2016-17, when they had 103 points, I can tell you that year, it was so easy. Like from a point of view of a guy who blogs and then writes, everything came easily because it had been so long since there was something positive to write about that it was a joy. It was just a pure joy, and I think people love this team, like just love it, and maybe too much. But you do reach a point where you're like, man, I love you, but I don't know if you're good for me, and I think that's what's happening.
Absolutely, I think we both agree.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've taken you well over the time you had available for me today, and I'll be respectful of that. I want to thank you again for joining me and solving the riddle of Lowetide for me. I didn't know where that came from, but that was great. It was great to learn about you and how you came about to doing what you're doing.
Well, why don't we do this, because I know that there's at least half of what you were going to ask me that we really didn't address. So maybe we'll wait a month or so and we'll do a second version if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I would very much appreciate that.
Yeah, because we got all summer to talk about this, my friend.
Absolutely.
Not going anywhere.
No.
Apparently, I'm not willing to do anything else but talk about the Oilers. So, no, it's all good. I really appreciate you having me, though, and I thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Allan.
Oilers Live.